Every morning, the school bus pulled up like clockwork, brakes screeching, doors swinging open, and dozens of students climbed aboard, laughing, groaning, scrolling through their phones, dreading or daydreaming about the day ahead. But one seat always seemed empty. It wasn't assigned, but the driver noticed it. Row 3, right side. No backpack, no jacket, just the faintest trace of something off, like the air had shifted but no one else had noticed. What nobody saw was that beneath that seat, pressed tightly into the shadows, was a teenager who climbed in early, long before the bus reached its first stop. He never spoke, never made a sound, just hid there, every single morning. And the driver, used to noise and movement and half-eaten snacks on the floor, finally decided to investigate. One day, with the bus parked and the route complete, he got down on his knees, lifted the flap of fabric beneath the bench, and what he found made him gasp so loudly the silence shattered. It wasn't just a student skipping school. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't even fear in the boy's eyes. It was something deeper, something raw. In his trembling hands was a photo, worn down by time. On the floor next to him, something that stopped the driver cold. He didn't understand right away, but within seconds, his entire view of what a troubled kid might be was turned upside down. This story isn't about breaking rules. It's about surviving in a world that sometimes looks the other way. It's about the quietest places where someone hides not just from others, but from the weight of their own life. And how, when one person finally sees what's really there, everything can change. Stay with me, because what the driver discovered under that bus seat isn't just heartbreaking. It's a mirror we all need to look into. Mr. Jansen had been driving the same school bus route for over 12 years. He knew the faces of every kid that boarded, from the sleepy-eyed elementary students to the too-cool-for-school teenagers glued to their headphones. His mornings followed a rhythm, predictable and mundane. That was until the pattern began to shift. It was subtle, an extra gum wrapper under the seat, a slight warmth where no one had been sitting, a whisper of movement in his rearview mirror that vanished before he could focus. At first, he dismissed it. Kids left things behind all the time. But soon, it became too consistent to ignore. Every morning, without fail, the same seat in row 3 had signs of presence without a body in sight. One morning, he slowed his departure, waiting behind the wheel a little longer before pulling from the lot. He turned his head slightly, catching something, a flicker of motion under the seat, barely visible in the shadows. That day, he decided not to confront it. He didn't want to scare whoever it was. Maybe a prank, maybe a dare, but it gnawed at him. The next morning, he arrived even earlier than usual and walked through the bus before starting the engine. At first, nothing. But when he knelt beside row 3 and peered into the darkness beneath the seat, his breath caught in his throat. There, curled tightly, arms around his knees, was a teenage boy. His clothes were clean but wrinkled, his hair messy, eyes bloodshot like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't flinch, didn't run, didn't even seem surprised to be discovered. He just looked up at Mr. Jansen with a stare that wasn't angry or afraid, but hollow, like someone who'd stopped hoping to be found. Mr. Jansen didn't shout. He didn't ask questions right away. He simply crouched lower, met the boy's gaze, and said, "Hey, do you want to come out?" The boy didn't answer. He just shook his head once, clutching something in his hands, a small object wrapped in cloth. The driver recognized pain when he saw it. And this wasn't mischief. This was survival. After a long pause, the boy finally spoke, not in sentences but fragments. "I don't want to go home," he whispered. "It's better here. It's quiet." Mr. Jansen nodded, not to agree, but to acknowledge the weight of those words. He didn't press. He asked for the boy's name. "Eli," came the quiet reply. Mr. Jansen sat with him a while longer, crouched between the cold floor and the seat above, silently deciding that today's route could wait. Eventually, Eli agreed to sit upright, but only if he could stay on the bus. Mr. Jansen made him a deal. He'd drive the route like normal, and they'd talk again at the end. Eli nodded. So they did. As kids piled in, unaware of what had just occurred, Eli stayed quiet in his seat, hood up, eyes distant. None of the other students seemed to notice the change. That, more than anything, told Mr. Jansen just how invisible Eli had become. When the bus emptied hours later, they sat together again. Mr. Jansen offered him a sandwich from his lunchbox. Eli took it slowly, like someone who hadn't been offered anything in a long time. Do you live nearby? Mr. Jansen asked gently. Eli hesitated. Kind of. The driver didn't push. He just listened. And slowly, a story began to unfold. Not all at once, but like pieces of a puzzle dropping into place. Eli didn't explain everything, but he said enough. His home wasn't safe. Not in the dramatic, obvious ways that get reported, but in the quiet ways that slip through cracks. Neglect, cold silences, long absences, the kind of emotional void that turns a house into a ghost town. They don't even know if I'm there or not, he said. Sometimes I think I'm just air. Mr. Jansen's heart broke in ways he didn't expect. He had transported hundreds of kids before, but this was the first time one had tried to make the bus their sanctuary. You don't have to do this alone, he said. Eli didn't respond, but for the first time, his eyes glistened. Not with fear, but with something closer to recognition. Someone had finally seen him. The next morning, Eli was waiting by the fence near the depot. Not the official bus stop, not even close. Just a quiet spot where no one looked twice. He didn't try to hide this time. He boarded last, took the third-row seat, and stared straight ahead. Mr. Jansen greeted him with a nod and a warm, good morning. It wasn't forced. It wasn't loud. It was just there, present, like a small light left on in the dark. As the week went on, Eli showed up every day. Always early, always quiet, always alone. Mr. Jansen started bringing extra snacks. Nothing fancy, just an extra granola bar or bottle of juice. He never offered them in front of others. Just left them on the dashboard with a small note. For Eli. No pressure. Sometimes they were taken, sometimes not. But the gesture hung there like an unspoken promise. You matter, even when you can't speak it yet. Eventually, Eli began to talk. Not much, and never in front of others. But after the last stop, he'd linger as Mr. Jansen parked the bus, and they'd sit together in the quiet. One day Eli asked, "Why do you care?" Mr. Jansen didn't hesitate. Because I've seen too many kids disappear without ever leaving. Eli looked out the window. Feels like that most days. Then came the morning Eli didn't show up. Mr. Jansen waited an extra minute. Then 2. Then 5. No sign of him. The route continued, but something felt wrong. The driver's mind raced with possibilities. Was Eli okay? Had someone found out about his hiding place? Had home finally caught up to him? That day, the bus felt heavier than usual, even though one seat remained empty. It wasn't until the end of the route that Mr. Jansen saw him, curled up behind a dumpster near the school's maintenance shed, his backpack pressed to his chest like a shield. His hoodie was damp from the morning frost. Mr. Jansen didn't speak. He just walked over and sat down beside him on the concrete. Didn't think anyone would come looking, Eli muttered. Mr. Jansen answered quietly, I always check the seats, especially yours. The school counselor got involved after that day. Not because Mr. Jansen reported Eli out of obligation, but because he believed in bridges, not walls. He told Eli what would happen, who he was bringing in, and why. This isn't to fix you, he explained. It's to make sure you don't keep falling through cracks no one even knows are there. Eli agreed, but only if Mr. Jansen stayed in the room the first time. That, to the driver, was the clearest sign of trust he'd ever received. Ms. Patel, the counselor, was patient and gentle. She didn't rush Eli. She brought in art supplies and let him draw instead of talk. The first thing he sketched was the inside of the bus. Row 3. A pair of sneakers. A sandwich on the seat. She asked him what it meant. That's where I feel okay, he said. Where I don't have to pretend I'm not drowning. As the sessions continued, Eli slowly began opening up about home. His parents weren't violent, just absent. Emotionally shut down. They worked long hours, argued in whispers, and forgot birthdays more than they remembered. No one was outright cruel, but the silence in the house screamed louder than any slap ever could. They think if they pay the bills, that means they're loving, he said once. But no one ever really sees me there. The more Eli shared, the more Ms. Patel realized how deep his loneliness ran. Not just in the home, but in school, in friendships, in the subtle social gaps that left kids like him on the outside. Invisible, he once described himself. Like I could walk out the front door and never come back, and it'd take them a week to notice. That kind of ache doesn't bruise the skin. It bruises the soul. But every morning, the bus kept showing up. Row 3 stayed open. The granola bars kept appearing. And slowly, Eli began to realize something powerful. He wasn't invisible here. Not anymore. One Friday morning, as the sky blushed with early light, Eli boarded the bus carrying something new. A sketch pad, tightly held against his chest. He didn't say anything, just gave Mr. Jansen a short nod and walked to his usual seat. After the last student was dropped off, he lingered as always. But this time, instead of silence, he held out the sketch pad. "You want to see?" he asked quietly. Mr. Jansen took it with care, flipping through the pages slowly. There were drawings of the bus interior from different angles, a few portraits of students, blurred faces with shadowed eyes, and one that made him pause. Himself, sitting at the wheel, eyes soft, hands relaxed, a granola bar on the dashboard. It was drawn in pencil, but shaded with surprising detail. "That one's from the first day I saw you waiting for me," Eli said. "I thought maybe it was just a lucky day." Mr. Jansen handed it back. "No such thing as luck when it comes to noticing someone," he said. "That's called caring." Eli looked away, but his smile said everything. These moments, small as they were, had become lifelines, connections in a world that often offered nothing but isolation. And the sketchpad was more than art. It was a voice, finally finding shape. Later that day, Ms. Patel met with Mr. Jansen privately. She had noticed something changing in Eli. More calm, more confidence, a flicker of self-worth slowly forming. "Whatever you're doing," she said, "keep doing it." Mr. Jansen just shook his head. "I'm just driving the bus." But deep down, they both knew it was more than that. He had offered Eli something school couldn't grade: consistency, presence, dignity. But something else was shifting too. One afternoon, as Eli walked from the bus to the school entrance, another student bumped into him and muttered, "Freak." Mr. Jansen saw in the mirror. He watched Eli pause, just for a second, and then keep walking. No reaction, no confrontation. But that night, Eli didn't board the bus for the ride home. He didn't show up at all. Panic bubbled under Mr. Jansen's skin as the afternoon dragged into evening. He checked with the school. Eli had been marked absent for his last 2 classes. No one had seen him leave. The bus driver retraced his route, scanning sidewalks, bus stops, even the alley behind the maintenance shed. Nothing. For the first time in weeks, the bus ride felt like it used to: routine, impersonal, hollow. The next morning, Eli wasn't waiting. Not by the fence. Not behind the depot. Mr. Jansen drove the route in silence, distracted, glancing at row 3 more than he should have. After his shift, he called Ms. Patel. She had been trying to reach Eli's parents, but they weren't answering. "He's gone before," she said quietly. "But this feels different. Like he doesn't want to come back." 3 days passed. Then 4. Then 6. Mr. Jansen started carrying an extra flashlight in his bus, checking under seats, walking the perimeter of the school before each run. The other kids didn't notice. They were absorbed in their worlds. But Mr. Jansen noticed everything. The absence was loud. The emptiness in row 3 had shape. It had a name, and it hurt. Then, on the 7th morning, as frost clung to the edges of the windshield, Mr. Jansen pulled up to his first stop. And there he was. Eli, thinner, paler, eyes tired but burning with something fierce. He climbed aboard without a word and sat in row 3, dropping his sketch pad on the seat beside him. Mr. Jansen didn't speak until the route was done. Then he parked the bus, turned to him, and asked, "Where did you go?" Eli didn't answer right away. Then, after a long breath, he said, "I needed to know if I'd be missed." His voice cracked on the last word. "I'm sorry," he added. Mr. Jansen shook his head. "You don't have to be sorry. Just don't disappear on me again." Eli looked down. "I won't." And for the first time, he leaned back in the seat, not hiding, not bracing, just resting. After that morning, something shifted, not just in Eli, but in the rhythm of the bus itself. He started boarding with his head held a little higher. He still kept to himself, still sat in row 3, but there was a presence to him now, like he wasn't just surviving the ride. He was claiming it. Mr. Jansen noticed the change in the way Eli watched the world outside the window, less like he was escaping it, and more like he was starting to wonder what was possible beyond it. One day, Eli handed him a folded sheet of paper before stepping off the bus. "You can read it later," he said. When Mr. Jansen unfolded it in the quiet of the parked lot, he found a short letter written in Eli's neat, cautious handwriting. "You didn't ask me to talk. You just made space for me to show up. That's why I keep coming back." At the bottom, Eli had drawn a small bus with row 3 circled in red and a tiny heart beside it. The drawing stayed on Mr. Jansen's dashboard from that day forward, not for decoration, but as a reminder that his job had never just been about wheels and roads. It was about who got on and what they brought with them. That seat was more than vinyl and foam now. It was a lifeline, a place of belonging, a quiet sanctuary for a boy who had almost vanished. Meanwhile, Ms. Patel began working with the school administration to support Eli more formally. His teachers were looped in, assignments were adjusted, expectations were softened, not because Eli was weak, but because he was healing. And healing doesn't happen on demand. It happens in moments of safety, over time, with people who choose to stay. One chilly afternoon, as snow flurried against the bus windows, Eli stood before getting off and turned to Mr. Jansen. "Do you think people like me get to have good lives?" he asked. The question hit like a stone wrapped in velvet, soft in delivery, sharp in weight. Mr. Jansen met his eyes. "Not only do I think you get to, I think you're already on your way there." Eli nodded slowly, stepped off, and left behind footprints that wouldn't fade with the snow. Winter deepened, and with it came long, dark mornings and the hush of frost over the windows. But even in the cold, Eli never missed a ride. He started arriving early, not to hide anymore, but to help. He'd bring his sketch pad and sit beside Mr. Jansen while the engine warmed up. They'd talk about little things, music, books, the weird noises the bus made when it turned too sharply. It was ordinary, beautifully, powerfully ordinary. One morning, Eli brought a new drawing. It showed the bus interior, but this time it was filled with color. Kids laughing, sunlight pouring through the windows, Mr. Jansen grinning in the mirror. And in row 3, Eli, smiling, open, alive. "That's how I imagine it," he said. "Not how it is yet, but maybe soon." Mr. Jansen felt his chest tighten. He didn't say it, but he thought, it already is. Eli's sketchpad had become a journal of his transformation. Each page marked a step, from shadows to light, from silence to expression. Ms. Patel asked if she could scan the drawings and use them in a presentation about emotional wellness at the school. Eli hesitated at first, then agreed, on one condition. "Don't say they're mine. Just say there's someone who needed to be seen." And so, the art began to speak where words still struggled. Then came the unexpected, a letter from the district. Mr. Jansen was nominated for a Community Hero Award. The letter cited his dedication, compassion, and the quiet difference he made in a student's life. He hadn't asked for recognition. In truth, he hadn't even realized how far the story had reached. When he told Eli, the boy looked stunned. "You deserve it," he said. "You saw me when no one else did." The ceremony was small, but heartfelt. Mr. Jansen gave a short speech. He didn't mention names, but he said, "Sometimes, the people who need us most won't ask for help. They'll hide in plain sight, under seats, behind silence. If you want to change a life, start by showing up. And keep showing up." In the crowd, Eli sat quietly in the back row, sketchpad in his lap, eyes bright, heart wide open. After the ceremony, something in Eli blossomed further. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was becoming. He started sitting with other kids on the bus from time to time, still quiet, still guarded, but open enough to exchange a few words, a nod, a small laugh. The other students, once indifferent, had begun to notice him not as the strange, quiet kid, but as someone who belonged. Because when someone is seen, the world slowly learns how to see them too. One morning, a 6th grader dropped her backpack while getting on the bus. Books scattered down the steps, and for a moment, she froze, unsure what to do as everyone watched. Before Mr. Jansen could react, Eli stood up and helped her gather her things. No one expected it, least of all the girl, who whispered, "Thanks," before taking her seat. Eli returned to row 3, but now, his posture held a quiet pride. It was a small act, but monumental in what it symbolized. Ms. Patel continued to check in with Eli, but their meetings were no longer about holding him together. They were about building his future. They discussed goals, college, art programs, maybe even teaching one day. "I don't know if I'm made for all that," he said once. "I'm still figuring out how to be a person." Miss Patel smiled. "You already are one. And a pretty incredible one, too." Eli's parents had begun attending counseling as well, after Miss Patel initiated contact through the school. They weren't cruel people, just disconnected, lost in their own struggles, never realizing how deeply their absence had shaped their son. Slowly, and with a lot of work, they started to show up. Not perfectly, but presently. Eli didn't forgive them overnight, but he let the doors stay open. Sometimes that's all healing needs, a door, slightly ajar, waiting. On the first day of spring, Eli rode the bus with the window cracked open, letting the fresh air tousle his hair. "It smells like a new start," he said, more to himself than anyone. Mr. Jansen heard him anyway. He looked at the boy through the mirror, taller now, brighter, and thought, this is what growth looks like. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up day after day until one day you realize the shadows are behind you. As the school year entered its final stretch, preparation for the end-of-year art exhibition began. Students from all grades were encouraged to submit something that reflected their personal journey. Eli debated for days whether to participate. "It feels too big," he confessed to Mr. Jansen. "Like I'm letting people into a part of me that's still fragile." Mr. Jansen replied, "Sometimes sharing your story helps strengthen it." In the end, Eli did submit a piece, a large, mixed-media collage made from torn pages of old notebooks, bus transfer stubs, bits of fabric, and pencil sketches. At the center was a single image, a boy curled under a bus seat, a faint glow reaching toward him from above. The piece was titled, "The First Time I Was Found." When the exhibit opened, it was the most talked-about work in the gallery. Eli didn't stay near his display. He wandered the room, watching others react from distance. Some were silent. Some cried. A few students whispered to one another, wondering aloud who had created it. But no one guessed. And Eli liked it that way. It wasn't about being known. It was about being understood. About someone seeing the art and thinking, "That feels like me." After the exhibit, a younger student approached Eli in the hallway. "I liked your piece," she said shyly. "It made me feel less weird." Eli didn't say much in return. He just nodded, then offered her a small, folded sketch of a tiny flower growing through a crack in the pavement. She held it like it was gold. And just like that, Eli became for someone else what Mr. Jansen had been for him, a quiet lifeline. On the last day of school, Eli waited until every student had left the bus. Then he turned to Mr. Jansen and handed him a sealed envelope. "Don't open it until after summer starts," he said. "Promise." Mr. Jansen raised 2 fingers. "Scout's honor." Eli smiled, then stepped off the bus for the final time that year. No longer hiding, no longer vanishing, but walking straight into the warmth of a new beginning. The bus felt quieter without Eli, even when it was full. The energy of summer had taken over, kids laughing louder, windows cracked open wider, backpacks growing lighter. But for Mr. Jansen, something was missing. It wasn't just the absence of a student. It was the space Eli had occupied in the quiet moments. That third-row seat still held meaning, still whispered stories that no one else could hear. When the final route ended and the school doors closed for break, Mr. Jansen returned to his home and finally opened the envelope Eli had given him. Inside was a single letter and a drawing. The drawing was simple, a school bus parked beneath a large tree, its shadow stretching wide. In the window sat Mr. Jansen, smiling. Outside, a boy leaned against the bus with a notebook in hand, light pouring over him. On the tree's bark were the words, "Some roots grow in places no one thinks to look." The letter, written in Eli's now familiar hand, was even more powerful. "You didn't just give me a seat. You gave me space to grow. And you never once asked me to hurry. That's what saved me. Not big speeches. Not lessons. Just you, showing up. I hope someday I can be someone's seat. Someone's safe place. Like you were for me." Mr. Jansen read it again and again, each time feeling the weight and warmth of those words settle deeper. He framed both the drawing and the letter, not to display, but to keep beside his nightstand. Some people collect trophies, others medals. But Mr. Jansen knew this was the kind of honor that truly mattered. A boy had walked onto his bus broken, and through nothing more than presence and patience, he had left whole. As summer drifted on, Mr. Jansen found himself slowing down in small ways, taking different routes on his errands, reading more, listening more. He noticed things he hadn't before. Kids walking with their heads down. Parents shouting in parking lots. He didn't interfere, but he saw. And when someone waved, he always waved back. Because he now understood, sometimes, acknowledgement is the first step toward healing. One day in late July, Mr. Jansen received a message from Ms. Patel. "Eli wants a meet," it read. "He's been working on something. Said it wouldn't be finished unless you saw it." They arranged to meet at the school art room. Quiet, empty for the summer, with sunlight filtering through dusty windows. When Mr. Jansen arrived, Eli was already there, surrounded by canvases and open sketchbooks. Eli greeted him with a quiet smile, no longer nervous, no longer unsure. "I've been painting," he said, "not just for school. For me. I wanted to show you." On the far wall, a large canvas stood covered in a white cloth. Eli pulled it down slowly, revealing a mural-sized painting of a long road stretching into the distance. Along the side of the road was a yellow bus, and above it, sky bleeding into dawn. The title in the corner read, "The Ride Back to Myself." Mr. Jansen stood in silence, absorbing every stroke, every layer. The emotion in the painting was raw but hopeful, like someone who had walked through fire and emerged with light in their hands. Eli watched him closely. "Do you think others will understand it?" he asked. Mr. Jansen looked at him. "Even if they don't, they'll feel it. And that's enough." They sat for a while, talking about art, about the upcoming school year, about what it means to begin again. Eli mentioned applying to a youth arts program. "I want to teach kids like me," he said, "ones who don't know they're artists yet, or people yet." Mr. Jansen smiled. "You're going to change lives, Eli, and they won't even realize it until years later, just like you didn't." As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the paint-streaked floor, Eli turned to him and said, "Do you still drive the same route?" Mr. Jansen nodded. "Row 3 still waiting?" Eli asked, half joking. Mr. Jansen chuckled. "Always." And in that moment, they both knew some seats in life are never empty. They wait, quietly, for the next person who needs them most. As August approached, preparations for the new school year resumed. The halls were filled once again with fresh supplies, bulletin boards being decorated, and the buzz of nervous anticipation. Mr. Jansen returned to his regular routine, inspecting the bus, cleaning out the cubbies, making sure every seatbelt clicked and every mirror was just right. But when he reached row 3, he paused, letting his hand rest gently on the seat. A quiet moment of remembrance and readiness. He placed something new there, a folded piece of paper tucked neatly in the corner. On it, he wrote, "You are seen. You matter. This seat has held pain but also healing. Welcome." He didn't know who would sit there this year. Maybe no one would. But if someone did, if another child climbed aboard carrying more than they could speak of, they'd find that note. A whisper of hope waiting in the stillness. On the first day of school, students poured into the bus once again, eyes wide, shoulders hunched under the weight of change. New faces mixed with familiar ones. Laughter returned, as did noise, chaos, and forgotten lunchboxes. But for Mr. Jansen, everything felt different now. He saw more. He noticed more. Every slumped posture, every averted gaze. He was no longer just a driver. He was a watcher of stories before they unfolded. Then, at the third stop, a girl stepped on board. She was small for her age, with long sleeves covering her hands and a backpack nearly as big as she was. She moved quietly, scanned the rows, and chose row 3. Mr. Jansen didn't say a word. He just watched as she sat, her knees drawn up, fingers twisting the strap of her bag. A moment later, she reached beside her and found the note. She read it, folded it again, and slipped it into her pocket. She didn't smile, but she looked up, straight at the mirror where Mr. Jansen sat watching. Their eyes met just for a second, and in that brief connection, the torch passed. One seat, one note, one new beginning. The days grew longer again, the heat of summer clinging to the afternoons. But inside that bus, a new story had begun to take shape. The girl, whose name Mr. Jansen later learned was Hannah, didn't speak much. But she showed up every day, always early, always sitting in the same place. It wasn't hard to recognize the weight she carried. Her silence was different than shyness. It was learned, practiced, protective. Just like with Eli, Mr. Jansen didn't rush her. He greeted her softly each morning, never pushing conversation. Instead, he left small notes on the dashboard again. Little phrases. You're stronger than you feel today. It's okay not to be okay. I see you. Sometimes they were gone when he returned. Other times, they stayed where he left them. But he kept writing them anyway. One afternoon, he found a sticky note left in return. Simple, written in a looping, careful script. Thank you. It wasn't much, but it was everything. It meant she was listening. It meant she felt something. Connection doesn't begin with full sentences. It begins with moments, with a glance, with the gentle letting down of walls. And slowly, those walls began to crack. Meanwhile, Eli had begun volunteering with a youth art program in the city. He'd send updates every few weeks, photos of kids holding paintbrushes, smiling with their whole faces. In one message, he wrote, "They remind me of me before I knew how to speak in color. Thank you for giving me my first canvas." Mr. Jansen saved every message in a folder on his desk, titled Passengers Who Changed Me. And so, the story continued, not in grand gestures or dramatic turns, but in the daily act of showing up, in the steady hum of a bus engine, in the quiet between stops, in the space between brokenness and healing where a driver kept the seat warm, and a child finally began to believe the world might hold space for them too. One chilly morning in late September, Hannah climbed onto the bus a little slower than usual. Her eyes were red, her sleeves pulled even lower, and she didn't look up as she passed Mr. Jansen. She slid into row 3, tucked her knees to her chest, and stared out the window without blinking. The shift in her energy was unmistakable. Something had happened. Something deep. Mr. Jansen watched from the mirror, but didn't speak. He just reached for the small envelope he'd prepared the night before, almost as if he'd sensed it coming. He walked down the aisle before starting the engine and placed the envelope beside her. No words, just a gentle tap of his knuckle on the seat. Inside, a note written with more care than elegance. "You are not the burden you think you are. You are the reason someone else might keep going. Please stay." He returned to his seat and began the route, the usual chatter around them fading into background noise. Halfway through the ride, he saw her open the envelope. She read it, then folded it back slowly and pressed it against her chest. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall, and when her stop arrived, she lingered. As the last student stepped off, she turned to him, her voice almost a whisper. "Do you write those for everyone?" Mr. Jansen looked at her through the rear view. "I write them for the ones who need to hear them, and somehow, they always end up in the right hands." She gave a half smile, wobbly, but there. And with that, she left. Not lighter, not fixed, but seen. And sometimes, that's enough to make it through the next day. Later that evening, Mr. Jansen sat in his small kitchen, flipping through Eli's last sketchbook, which the boy had mailed him as a gift. On one of the final pages was a drawing of row 3, empty but glowing, and beneath it, the caption, "Leave the seat warm. Someone else will need it." That night, he wrote 3 new notes, just in case tomorrow someone else boarded with the weight of the world and no one else to carry it. The autumn leaves began to fall, coating the roads in gold and red as the days grew shorter. Hannah continued to take her place in row 3 each morning, and slowly, the distance in her eyes softened. She began responding to Mr. Jansen's greetings with a quiet, "Hi." And one morning, she even asked if she could sit up front for part of the ride. They talked about music, her favorite books, and how much she hated math. It wasn't much, but it was movement, a small light growing steadier with each passing day. Around this time, the school counselor, Ms. Rayner, reached out to Mr. Jansen. "Hannah's mentioned you a few times," she said. "Whatever you're doing, it's helping." Mr. Jansen shook his head humbly. "I'm just driving a bus," he said, the same words he'd said before. But inside, he knew better now. He wasn't just transporting kids from point A to point B. He was giving them time, quiet, uninterrupted time to exist, to feel, to breathe. Hannah's drawings began to appear, just like Eli's once had, first as doodles on notebook corners, then as folded pages left behind on the seat. One depicted a small girl holding a flashlight, surrounded by towering shadows. Another showed a bus glowing in the night, with the words, "Where the noise stops and the world listens." She never explained them. She didn't have to. Other students started to notice. They began greeting Hannah, asking to sit beside her, complimenting her sketches when they caught glimpses. She still kept to herself, but she no longer shrank into the seat. Row 3 had become her place of strength, not hiding. Mr. Jansen watched all this unfold like a slow bloom. No fanfare, no spotlight, just courage growing quietly. And one morning, as frost rimmed the windows and the world seemed stiller than usual, Hannah stood beside Mr. Jansen before stepping off. "You know," she said softly, "I think I want to help kids like me one day. The invisible ones." Mr. Jansen nodded, a familiar warmth rising in his chest. "Then you already know how. Just start by noticing." She smiled, wider this time, and walked off into the morning sun. As the months passed, the legacy of Row 3 quietly grew. Hannah wasn't the only one who changed. Her courage had begun to shift the energy of the entire bus. Students who once sat in isolated silence now leaned in toward one another. The laughter was more genuine, and the silences less lonely. It was as though one small act of being seen had cracked open the whole environment, letting light pour in where shadows used to sit. One day, a boy named Liam boarded the bus with a black eye. He sat in the back, hood pulled low, fingers trembling. He refused to answer when spoken to and flinched when another student bumped his seat. Mr. Jansen noticed immediately, not because of the bruise, but because of the weight he was carrying, the same kind of invisible ache Eli and Hannah had once worn like armor. That afternoon, he slipped a note under Liam's seat. Nothing dramatic, just a simple line. "You don't have to tell your story today, but I'm here when you're ready." The next morning, the note was gone. No words were spoken, but Liam's posture was less tight. Over time, he started sitting closer to the front, sometimes near Hannah, who greeted him with quiet acceptance. She knew how to make space without demanding conversation. She had learned from the best. One afternoon, Liam left his own note behind, folded 3 times, and placed carefully where Mr. Jansen would find it. Inside it read, "I don't think I'm broken, just bent. Thanks for not treating me like glass." And beside the words was a simple drawing. Row 3, filled with golden light, 2 figures sitting side by side. Mr. Jansen kept the note, like the others, each one tucked into a weathered folder now thick with paper, pain, and hope. He understood something now with a clarity that changed him. Sometimes the smallest space, a single seat, a few inches of vinyl, can hold the weight of someone's whole world. And if you hold that space with care, it might just be enough. The days marched toward winter break, and with them came the usual flurry of activities, school projects, holiday programs, whispered wishes for snow. But for Mr. Jansen, the most meaningful gift came in the form of something completely unexpected, a handmade book bound with red thread, wrapped in brown paper. On the front cover, in careful lettering, were the words, "Row 3." Inside were drawings, notes, and letters from students who had sat in that spot over the past 2 years. Some were written by hand, others printed and glued in place. They spoke of fear, sadness, recovery, and most of all, being seen. Each page was a piece of a puzzle. Testimonies of transformation sparked not by grand speeches or dramatic rescues, but by the quiet, consistent act of noticing. Hannah had organized it. She had gone to Ms. Rayner, collected the letters, and arranged them one by one. At the end of the book was a final message to the man who drove the same road every day and somehow managed to steer us home. Not just to school, but to ourselves. "Thank you." Mr. Jansen read every page with tears that refused to be held back. He wasn't a teacher. He wasn't a counselor. But he had become something sacred, a witness. That night, he sat alone on his porch, the first snow beginning to fall, and thought about how many times he had almost ignored the signs, the extra gum wrapper, the warm seat, the quiet stairs. How easy it would have been to chalk it all up to coincidence. And how much would have been lost if he had. The lives that would have gone untouched. The stories untold. The next morning, as he climbed into the bus, Mr. Jansen looked back at the rows, not just as seats, but as stages for silent stories, each waiting to be acknowledged. He placed the book behind his seat where he could reach it, just in case another child ever needed proof that someone had listened before, that someone still would. As the final week before winter break approached, the atmosphere on the bus buzzed with a different kind of energy. Kids joked about snow days, exchanged early gifts, and counted down the minutes to freedom. But for Mr. Jansen, the ride had taken on a deeper meaning. Each student who stepped on board now felt like a soul carrying untold chapters. He found himself wondering, what's their row 3? Where are they hiding their ache? One morning, he placed a small card on each seat. Nothing elaborate, just a handwritten note that read, "This seat matters because you do. Thank you for being part of this journey." At first, he worried they might be ignored or tossed aside. But by the time they reached the school, he saw something incredible. Some students had pinned the cards to their backpacks. Others held them gently, as if afraid to lose them. Later that day, Hannah stood at the front of the bus holding a small, wrapped box. "It's not much," she said, "but I wanted you to have it." Mr. Jansen opened it slowly. Inside was a keychain, handcrafted from clay, painted in warm tones, with the number 3 carved into the center and a tiny gold heart below it. "For row 3, she said, "so you never forget what started here." That night, Mr. Jansen added the keychain to his set, placing it right beside his bus key. He didn't need the reminder, but somehow, holding it in his hand gave him a quiet sense of strength. He thought back to Eli, to the empty seat that changed everything, and now, to the many lives that had quietly bloomed there, not all at once, but gradually, like flowers pushing through winter soil. The next morning, as the bus doors opened and the cold air rushed in, a new student stepped on board. Nervous, unsure, shoulders hunched, he scanned the rows, and then, without hesitation, sat in row 3. Mr. Jansen watched him in the mirror, a knowing smile creeping onto his face. The seat was ready. The story was about to begin again. By the time the final bell rang before winter break, the bus had become more than transportation. It had become a vessel of healing. Row 3 remained a quiet constant, a space where students found refuge without having to ask. What had started as a hidden cry beneath a seat had transformed into something sacred, a tradition of listening, of gentleness, of choosing to see what others might overlook. Mr. Jansen began keeping a journal. Each day after the route, he'd write a few sentences, not about schedules or road conditions, but about moments. A smile, a drawing left behind, a thank you whisper at the door. He called it the silent stories, not because the kids didn't speak, but because their deepest truths often lived in what they didn't say. On the last day before break, he gave each student a small card with a printed message. "You are part of something beautiful. Never forget your story matters." Many of them smiled. A few rolled their eyes. But one boy, quiet and shy, stayed behind after everyone else had gone. "You really mean it?" he asked. "That my story matters?" Mr. Jansen bent down, looked him in the eyes, and said, "It always has." That night, as snow blanketed the streets, Mr. Jansen walked to the bus one last time before break. He stood in the middle of the aisle, letting the silence settle around him. He placed a new note in row 3. "If you're hurting, stay here as long as you need. You're safe. You're seen." Then he turned off the lights and stepped into the night, heart full. Outside, the world continued moving. Cars rushing past, lights twinkling, people laughing. But inside that bus, in one humble seat, a quiet promise remained. A promise that whoever came next would never again have to sit in silence and wonder if they mattered. Because now, thanks to one teen and one driver who chose to look, the answer was already waiting. After the new year began, the return to routine brought a strange comfort. The roads were slick with thawed snow, the mornings still cold, but the warmth inside the bus was something no heater could produce. The students greeted Mr. Jansen with familiarity now, some with high fives, others with shy nods. And as always, row 3 remained occupied, not by one child, but by a rotating presence of those who needed it most, even if they didn't yet know why. One particular morning, a girl named Ava sat in the seat, unusually quiet. Normally upbeat and full of chatter, she now stared out the window with red-ringed eyes and sleeves pulled over her hands. Mr. Jansen didn't say a word. He slipped a note into the small tray by her seat. "Whatever it is, you don't have to carry it alone." She didn't react at first, but the next day, She brought him a drawing. Row 3 with a single teardrop turning into a heart. It wasn't the first time a note had found the right person at the right moment. And it wouldn't be the last. By now, some students have begun to leave their own notes behind. Anonymous words of encouragement tucked into cracks, folded in books, or hidden in seat cushions. Messages like "Keep going," "You are not alone," and "I survived yesterday. You can too." Mr. Jansen began collecting them in a shoebox labeled "Bus Letters of Light." One afternoon, Ms. Rayner, the school counselor, visited the bus unannounced. "You've started something bigger than you think," she said. "This bus has become a sanctuary." Mr. Jansen smiled softly. "All I did was drive." But they both knew better. He had cultivated a culture of care, of quiet dignity, of trust in spaces where none had existed before. And it was spreading. Before she left, Ms. Rayner handed him a note from a student who hadn't signed their name. It read, "I used to cry before school. Now I wait for the bus instead. Thank you for changing what mornings feel like." Mr. Jansen held the note in both hands, the weight of those simple words grounding him. This was why he returned, day after day. Because now, this wasn't just a job. It was a lifeline. The seasons began to shift again, and with the longer days came new faces, students who had transferred mid-year, uncertain and guarded. One of them, a boy named Caleb, boarded the bus with headphones so large they covered half his face. He never made eye contact, never spoke. He sat in the far back, even though row 3 was empty. Mr. Jansen noticed, but didn't force anything. He just left a folded paper on the dashboard. "Row 3 is open when you are." For a while, Caleb ignored it. But one day, without a word, he moved up, sat down, didn't look at Mr. Jansen, but didn't hide either. The next day, he sat there again, and the next. Eventually, he pulled off his headphones, slowly, tentatively, as if preparing for the noise of the world, only to discover it was quieter here. And after several rides, he finally whispered something. "I like this seat." Over the next weeks, Caleb began bringing a notebook, not to draw, to write. Sometimes poetry, sometimes long streams of thought. He never shared them until one morning, he left a page behind. Mr. Jansen found it tucked beneath the seat. It read, "I thought I had nothing to say. Turns out I just never had anyone to say it near." He didn't return the note. He simply left another. "I'm here. Keep writing." Word of the row began to grow quietly beyond the bus. Teachers noticed shifts in behavior, small groups forming around previously isolated kids. Some students wrote essays about the driver who listens. Others submitted poems for class projects about the seat that sees sadness. A counselor from another school even visited to learn what was happening. But the truth was simple. It wasn't a program. It wasn't official. It was just love, repeated, daily. That spring, Mr. Jansen bought a small embroidered patch online. It read, "Row 3. He sewed it into the seat back himself. No explanation, no announcement, just a symbol, a quiet signal to those who needed to know that yes, this is the place. This is where the broken pieces begin to rearrange. Not always to heal fully, but to begin. And that's enough." By early spring, Mr. Jansen began to notice something remarkable. Students who had once been invisible, quiet, anxious, withdrawn, were starting to look out for others. Not with big gestures, but with small, meaningful acts. A girl who had once cried silently in row 3 now tapped a new boy on the shoulder and offered him her window seat. Another student began leaving drawings taped to the back of random seats. Smiling suns, flowers, simple words like "You matter." It was as if row 3 had spilled into the rest of the bus. The energy had shifted. Even the noisiest kids lowered their voices when someone looked sad. Arguments ended quicker. Apologies came easier. Mr. Jansen watched this change unfold like a sunrise, slow, quiet, unstoppable. And though he never spoke about it directly, everyone knew what started it. A decision, made long ago, to see what others overlooked. One morning, Hannah returned to the bus holding something in her hands, a small wooden plaque. She handed it to Mr. Jansen with a quiet grin. "I made it in shop class," she said. The plaque read, "This is a moving sanctuary. Please ride with kindness." He mounted it near the front of the bus, just above the door. Students noticed it immediately, and though no one said much, There was a new kind of reverence as they stepped on board. That week, a teacher stopped Mr. Jansen in the school parking lot. "Whatever you're doing on that bus," she said, "keep doing it. I've never seen these kids so grounded. It's like the ride itself is part of their education." He chuckled. "All I do is drive." But she shook her head. "No, you drive with presence. That's the difference." He didn't argue. He just nodded, quietly humbled. Later that day, Mr. Jansen opened his bus letters of light box and added 3 more notes. One from a student who had never spoken a word aloud until that year. Another from a parent who wrote, "My son gets on the bus smiling. He never did that before." And a third, unsigned, "You don't know me, but I sit in row 3, and it feels like a place I never thought I'd find, safe and sacred." One particularly rainy morning, as water streaked down the windows and thunder rolled in the distance, a girl named Layla boarded the bus soaked and shivering. Her umbrella had flipped inside out, her shoes were muddy, and her eyes darted like a frightened animal's. She hesitated at the steps. Then, without a word, she walked directly to row 3 and sat down. Mr. Jansen saw it all, saw the way her hands clenched her sleeves, the way her knees bounced, the way her entire body screamed for invisibility. He didn't disturb her, but as the route began, he slipped a thermos of warm tea onto the seat behind her. A note tucked underneath read, "This is your seat now. No questions. Just care." By the time they reached school, Layla had calmed. She left the thermos, but took the note. The next day, she brought it back, clean, full of hot chocolate, with a post-it attached. "I think this is how trust works." Mr. Jansen smiled all day, because even in the quietest exchange, there was healing happening. Wordless, weightless, but real. Around this time, Eli wrote again. His art program was growing, and he had been invited to speak at a youth event about how art can rescue what's unspoken. In his letter, he said, "It all began with a seat, with a man who didn't try to fix me, just saw me. I'm learning that maybe the best kind of help is just a hand resting quietly near yours." Mr. Jansen read it 3 times before tucking it beside the first letter Eli ever gave him. That afternoon, when Layla stepped off the bus, she turned to him and asked, "What made you start doing all this?" Mr. Jansen thought for a moment, then replied, "One day, someone hid under that seat, and I looked, and I gasped, and I realized most people don't." Layla nodded, as if she understood more than her years allowed. "Well," she said, "I'm glad you did. Otherwise, I'd still be hiding too." As the school year entered its final stretch, Mr. Jansen began noticing more than just the growth in individual students. He saw a culture blooming from a single decision. The energy on the bus wasn't always perfect, but it was intentional. Kids who once sat in silence now greeted one another. Quiet nods had become full conversations. The row that once held sorrow now held stories, sketches, whispered dreams, and sometimes laughter. One morning, a boy named Mateo boarded the bus with a bruised lip and downcast eyes. The students went quiet when they saw him. He walked slowly, scanning the seats, then stopped in front of row 3. He looked at it for a moment like someone standing before a gate. Then he slid in, pressed his back against the window, and pulled his hood low. Mr. Jansen didn't speak, but he reached up, tapped the plaque above the door once, and met Mateo's eyes through the mirror. The next day, Mateo returned. Still silent, still guarded, but something had changed. He left behind a note in row 3. "I sat here because I heard it helped people. I don't know if it will help me, but I need something. Anything." Mr. Jansen folded the note and placed it in the bus letters of light box. Then he added his own reply. "You already helped someone by showing up. That's how it starts." One by one, more students began to interact with the legacy of the seat. Some left behind small tokens, a bracelet, a comic strip, even a homemade keychain shaped like a heart. Others just wrote in the notebook Mr. Jansen had started keeping on the seat, an open journal where anyone could write whatever they needed, anonymously or not. Over time, the pages filled with pain, hope, poetry, and beautiful, broken truth. Mr. Jansen didn't monitor the journal. He simply let it live. Some kids wrote, some read, some just held it in their lap for a while and put it back. And slowly, it became clear this wasn't just about the seat anymore. It was about the choice to stay when someone was struggling. The choice to see someone without fixing them. The choice to create a world on four wheels where dignity, even in silence, could still grow. As the final month of school approached, Ms. Rayner reached out to Mr. Jansen with an idea. What if they created a small installation at the school? Something inspired by the impact of Row 3. Not a trophy, not a plaque, but something meaningful. Mr. Jansen hesitated at first. He didn't want the story to become about him. But she reassured him, this isn't about you. It's about what was made through you. Together, they designed a small corner in the school's library. It was quiet, tucked away between the shelves. At the center sat an old school bus seat, repurposed and reupholstered, with the words Row 3 embroidered along the back. Above it hung a sign, for when you need a moment to be seen without having to explain. Next to it was a small notebook, blank pages, waiting to hold what the heart couldn't carry alone. The students reacted immediately. Some sat there before school, some during lunch, some just passed by and rested their hands on the back of the seat, as if drawing strength from all the stories it had silently witnessed. One boy even left a sticky note. I've never sat in the real Row 3, but this one still helped me. The message stuck. Literally. Within days, the wall beside the seat was covered in notes. One afternoon, Mr. Jansen was invited to see the space himself. He sat down on the new seat, ran his hand over the stitching, and let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. All around him were messages from students he'd driven, from ones he never met, from kids who'd been changed by a legacy born from empathy. He realized then that what had started as a hidden boy under a seat had become something far bigger, a movement. Before leaving, he slipped a note of his own into the journal. It said, if you're reading this and wondering whether you matter, you do. Someone sat here before you, wondering the same, and now they're standing. So will you. Then he closed the book, stood up, and stepped into the hallway, where the laughter of children echoed like a promise that the work wasn't over, but it had already begun changing the world. As the final weeks of the school year ticked by, the legacy of Row 3 continued to ripple in quiet, profound ways. Students who had once barely spoken began checking in on each other. The notes on the wall near the library's Row 3 seat multiplied each day, a colorful mosaic of raw emotion, encouragement, and silent connection. One teacher commented, it's like the kids have created their own language of healing. And maybe they had. One morning, Mr. Jansen found a folded envelope taped to his bus dashboard. Inside was a thank you letter, not from a student, but from a parent. It read, I don't know exactly what happened on your bus, but my daughter started smiling again. She talks about school. She's drawing. She said, there's a seat where people like me are allowed to breathe. You'll never know what that means to a mother like me. Mr. Jansen sat in his seat long after the bus was empty, tears slipping down quietly. That day, he took a detour after his route ended. He stopped by the old depot where he'd first noticed something odd in Row 3. That warmth, that small gum wrapper, the breath of someone unseen. He sat in the park bus alone, placed his hand on the seat, and whispered, thank you, Eli. Because none of this would have begun without the courage of one boy who'd chosen to show up, even in hiding. In the final week of school, students decorated the bus with handmade streamers and signs for Driver Appreciation Day. But this year, it wasn't just about Mr. Jansen. It was about what he'd helped build. One banner, stretched across the back windows, read, this bus changed more than our mornings. It changed us. Another was taped above the mirror. Thanks for looking when no one else did. And on the last day, as the final student stepped off, Mr. Jansen found one last note left on Row 3. It was scrawled in blue ink, slightly smudged, signed only with a drawing of a sun. It said, I don't know who sat here first, but because they did, I could. And now, I'm going to tell someone else. Because no seat should ever be empty when someone needs to be found. The summer came gently, with warm mornings and the buzz of cicadas in the trees. The bus sat still more often now, but Mr. Jansen still visited it. Not every day, but enough. He'd open the door, sit in his old seat, and sometimes leave a new note in Row 3, even if no one would read it that day. It wasn't about who saw it. It was about continuing the ritual of remembering, of honoring. He began writing a book, quietly, privately, chronicling the journey. Not to publish, not yet, but to preserve. Each chapter began with a name or a moment. Eli hiding beneath the seat. Hannah whispering, "Thank you." Caleb removing his headphones. Mateo's silent sketch. The working title was Row 3, a place to begin again. Because that's what it had always been. One evening, Mr. Jansen received a message from Eli. "I've been accepted into a program that trains youth counselors," it read. "It's funny, right? I used to think I was the one who needed saving. But now, I think I'm meant to help others feel seen, like you helped me." Attached was a photo of Eli, older now, standing in front of a group of kids, all holding sketchbooks. And in the background, a bus seat painted gold. Later that summer, at a quiet school board meeting, Mr. Jansen was honored with a small ceremony. But instead of a traditional speech, the board invited students, past and present, to read excerpts from the bus letters of light. They stood, one by one, voices trembling but strong, sharing fragments of their past that had once only existed in shadows. And in that room, even the adults wiped their eyes. Mr. Jansen took no credit. He simply stood, hands in his pockets, and said, "I never planned to start something. I just refused to look away." And that was the truth. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about being human enough to notice, brave enough to stay, kind enough to make space for the unseen. In late summer, just before the new school year began, Mr. Jansen received a thick envelope in the mail. No return address, only a stamp and the number 3 written in bold black ink. Inside was a bundle of letters, each written by a different student who had once sat in row 3. Some were short, others pages long. Every one of them carried a story, and every story began the same way. "I didn't think anyone would notice me." One letter came from a girl named Naomi, now in college. Asterisk, "You didn't know this," she wrote, "but the day I first sat in row 3 was the day I had planned to disappear. Your note stopped me. I still have it. It's in my wallet, folded 27 times. It reminds me that one person seeing me was enough to survive another day." Mr. Jansen read that one slowly, then again, his hands trembling with reverence. Another letter was from a boy named Jordan. He wrote, "I thought being quiet meant I didn't matter. But then you said, silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. That sentence changed everything. I teach that now to my own students." And another, and signed, "You never asked for my name, but you made space for my pain." That was enough. Mr. Jansen laid them all out across his kitchen table and sat with them like sacred pages of scripture. The new school year began. A fresh wave of kids. Fresh noise. New hurts still unspoken. But something was different now, because row 3 had become a story passed down from older students to new ones. They whispered it to each other in the cafeteria. "If you ever feel like disappearing, sit in row 3. The driver will know." And so they did. Quietly, faithfully, one at a time. They came with invisible weights on their shoulders and left carrying something lighter. Not because their pain had vanished, but because someone had acknowledged it, noticed it, made room for it. And for so many of them, that small space between 2 seat backs became the most honest place in their world. Years later, long after Mr. Jansen had retired, the school bus he once drove was decommissioned. But before it was sent to scrap, a small group of teachers and students arranged to save part of it, specifically the seat from row 3. It was preserved, mounted on a wooden platform, and placed in the center of the new Student Wellness Center, beneath soft lighting, surrounded by walls filled with the notes, sketches, and letters that had been collected over a decade. A plaque beneath the seat read, "Dedicated to the students who thought no one would notice, and to the driver who proved them wrong." Above it, a framed message. "If you are hurting, sit here. You are not alone." Students visited in silence. Some cried, some smiled, some just touched the vinyl seat and left. But all of them understood, this wasn't just a memorial. It was a beginning. Mr. Jansen visited once a year. He never made a big deal of it. He'd arrive quietly, often when the halls were empty, and sit for a while in the old seat. Sometimes he'd leave a note. Other times, he'd read the ones students had left. But every visit ended the same way, with a hand resting gently on the seat and a whispered, "Still here." The notebook once kept on the bus had grown into an archive of hundreds of pages. It had been digitized and turned into a book, shared with counselors across the country. In workshops and teacher trainings, the story of row 3 was told, not as a fairy tale, but as a blueprint, a reminder that changing the life of one child, quietly and consistently, can ripple through generations. And so the story never ended, because somewhere, in another school, another bus, another quiet corner of the world, a kid still boards in silence, still wonders if anyone sees them. And because of what began on a cold morning with a hidden boy and a driver who chose to kneel down and look, a seat is waiting. Warm, open, ready. Some stories fade the moment they end. But this one stays with us because it speaks to something deep, something most of us have felt at least once, the ache of wondering if we matter. A boy hiding beneath a seat, a driver who decided to look, and the ripple that followed, not from grand gestures, but from presence. A consistent, quiet kind of love that didn't need to be loud to be life-changing. What began as a seat became a sanctuary, and what was once survival turned into legacy. The truth is, pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it sits quietly beside us, disguised as silence, as distance, as indifference. But the moment someone dares to see through that silence, to reach across it with empathy, everything begins to change. We may not all drive a school bus, but we all pass people every day who are hiding under their own metaphorical seats, just waiting for someone to care enough to notice. Row 3 teaches us something powerful. You don't have to fix someone to save them. You just have to show up. Again and again. The seat became a symbol, not because of what it was made of, but because of what it held: grief, hope, transformation. And maybe the most beautiful part is this: the story never belonged to just one person. It grew. It multiplied. It lives on through every student who chose to sit, to speak, to stay. So ask yourself, who is the invisible one in your life? Who is waiting for a nod, a gesture, a simple act that says, "I see you," because someone did it once. And that single choice rewrote the lives of dozens, possibly hundreds, possibly more. That's the power of one moment of awareness, one choice to care, one seat left open in love. If this story moved you, leave a comment below and tell us what your row 3 moment was. Like this video if you believe in the quiet power of kindness. And don't forget to subscribe so more stories like this find the people who need them most. Because sometimes the most important journeys don't happen on the road, but in the heart.